Welcome to the Bold SLP podcast. We are so happy that you're here and can't wait to share with you all of the amazing conversations we've been having.
We are the co-founders of the Bold SLP Collective, and we are also your hosts, Lisa, Desi, and myself, Ingrid. Each of us has a variety of experiences in all things bilingual and bimodal speech-language pathology. You'll get to know us pretty well on here.
We started this podcast to share our lived experiences, but also because we want to bring advocacy and cultural humility to the forefront of every speech therapy conversation. We hope that you'll join us each week, and we hope that you enjoy this episode.
Welcome to the Bold SLP podcast. I am your host, Ingrid, today flying solo with a very special guest. She is one of my favorite people on Instagram, and I hope to meet her in real life, so I don't have to say that anymore. I'm here with Marlene Medina Nero. She's a trilingual bimodal SLP in English, Spanish, and ASL, and she's on Instagram by that handle at trilingual bimodal SLP. Marlene, welcome to our podcast. Welcome to the Bold SLP podcast.
Thank you so much, Ingrid. And congratulations for this amazing podcast. I so enjoyed the first season. I cannot wait for season 2.
You're so sweet. Every time you listen, you let us know. And it really, like, we talk about it on our episodes too. I'm like, Marlene said this, or, Monica said that. You guys are so sweet, like sharing your compliments and cheering us on. I want to start with just a little intro about you because I think a lot of us have a hard time kind of cheering ourselves on. And you are such an impressive person. So I want you to tell us all about you, a little intro about Marlene.
Well, first of all, I'm your biggest fan. So I think you're so impressive as well. Thank you for complimenting me. So a little bit about me is that I am a trilingual SLP, self-proclaimed, although, there's no official title. I did grow up speaking Spanish. I was actually my first language. But since, going to school and my siblings learning English, I actually just grew up truly bilingual at home, mostly speaking Spanish, but also speaking English as we all grew up to go to school in California. So I was born in Salinas, California, which is like the Central Valley. If you don't know where that is, it's near San Jose, near Monterey Bay. I actually still have the 831 area code on my cell phone. So those are definitely my roots and where I grew up.
Wow.
And primarily Mexican and white community in the town that I grew up in. I grew up in King City, which is a very small rural town. But my family actually ended up there from Mexicali, Baja California. So my family is actually from Mexicali. Both of my parents were born and raised there. And my dad's family immigrated to that area of California when he was a teenager. So my dad actually graduated high school in the area where I grew up. And he learned English in high school as well. And then my parents got married and moved. He brought my mom over from Mexico to live in that area of California, which is where I grew up.
That's awesome.
So that's how, the area that I'm from. But then when I was a teenager, we moved to Las Vegas, which at the time felt very random. Why are we going to Las Vegas? But it was actually because my brother had his first son, and we all quickly became obsessed with my nephew, Diego. And we had to be close to him because we had been driving back and forth, and we were missing the most important years, his little infant years. So we moved almost like before he turned 1, we ended up in Las Vegas, which meant that I had to uproot myself. Like in high school, I was actually a high school freshman. And then I moved to Las Vegas and I was a sophomore, and it was a complete culture shock. And it was hard. It was really hard on me. I didn't have any friends. I'd kind of grown up in a small town, so all my friends were kind of built in. They knew my entire family. So I had to start a new life in Las Vegas, but I was with my nephew, and my brother ended up having 4 kids. So I was extremely happy, living in Las Vegas. And now I feel like I can't leave Las Vegas because it has everything. It has such a mix, international presence, and I do love it. So then around that time, I was in a high school that was high school and college at the same time. So I went to a charter school where I got college credits while I was in high school. And I took American Sign Language class. So that's where my third language comes in. I learned
I was going to ask you, where does the ASL come in?
When I started learning American Sign Language, I was very curious about the deaf community and how they had really like taken me in as a student. And they had the patience to teach me their language. So I really fell in love with learning ASL and socializing with the deaf community. So I was 19 when I started learning ASL, and I've never stopped. I'm 30 now.
I love that, Marlene. Yeah, I know that you wanted to share that for our listeners, and because you said when we chatted before that you haven't really talked about your roots before, but I knew about your roots because that's kind of how we connected.
Yes.
Well, we connected through a series of unfortunate memes that were coming through from an Instagram account, but
Yes.
that's kind of how we first found out about each other on the internet. And then how we truly connected was through DMs and voice notes and phone calls because we both are Mexican American and we're both daughters of immigrants in California and just have a lot of similarities in terms of our upbringing and our just heritage. So I knew all of this about you, but I'm so glad you got to share it with everybody here today.
Thank you.
What we're here to talk about today, though, is so near and dear to my heart, especially because you know that I love mentorship and I love seeing the next generation of SLPs come through. But what we're here for today is kind of to talk about the special burnout that comes with being a minority SLP, a bilingual SLP, because it's kind of like a twofold thing, right? We're already a minority in the field, and then we have a specialized skill of being bilingual, and then
Right.
you further specialize yourself in being trilingual and bimodal. So I just love having these conversations with you about it's a different kind of experience whenever you are the only one.
Yes.
So I love that we workshopped the title of this episode. So you guys, the title of this episode, when you look for it, is I Survived Grad School. Now what? Because I am 10 years out of grad school and Marlene is 5 years out, I believe you said.
4 years.
4 years out. So she's 4 years out, I'm 10 years out. And we have unique experiences, but then we get to talk to each other and we're like, yep, it's kind of the same thing. So let's start from the beginning. Tell us, how was grad school for you?
Grad school for me was very difficult, but for so much of my life, I am working so hard to meet the standard I have for myself. So I set myself an impossibly high standard. And I actually didn't want to go to grad school, Ingrid. I applied. I have shared this story before on my Instagram, but basically I applied because I was so frustrated with the field and how we were. I say were because I have hope now that the field is improving in this area thanks to a lot of people who are doing a lot of good work in how we work with the deaf community. So that is why I applied to go to grad school in Washington, D.C. at Gallaudet University. And I got accepted. And now I realize how silly of me it was to believe that I wouldn't get accepted, even though I met all of the criteria as a student to apply. But at the time, I really just couldn't see myself going to grad school.
Wow.
I already went into it with the idea that I don't really belong there. I just am here because I care a lot about the deaf community and the work that we do with them and being a part of the solution and, being a peacemaker in that area. So when I got to grad school, I felt very insecure. I felt at the same time very excited because I had always wanted to go to Gallaudet University. Because of all my studies in ASL, I knew that was the best place to be if you want to work in a culturally friendly manner with this community. So it was a great experience, a great opportunity for me. The areas where I really struggled were with my mental health, and I didn't actually realize it until recently in the year 2020. But grad school was, like big T trauma for me. because I was just working through so many mental health barriers that I didn't even realize I had. So being in grad school is like pulling me out of my environment and putting me into a different city with completely different people and doing the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And that was when it really came to the surface. And I'm like, I'm totally crying in my dorm room at 12 at midnight. I can't sleep. I had a severe sleep difficult. I was very severely sleep deprived. I couldn't sleep. I had nightmares. I had anxiety attacks, panic attacks that I didn't even know were panic attacks until years later.
Right.
But that was what I thought I had to put myself through in order to succeed, in order to meet my standard, that standard of, you know, young women who you have to overcome everything in order to get where you want to be. So in my eyes, that was what I needed to do. So grad school was both the happiest time and the most difficult time for me and my mental health.
Right. And my thing that I always say now, because I didn't know that even was a talking point, this even was a talking point for people whenever I've seen students share their concerns, or even SLPs share their concerns, I see the pushback from other SLPs who say, oh, well, this is a tough field. You know, we can't water down the field.
Right.
And I'm like, none of us, and I'm sure you aren't either. And none of us, me and people that I talk to, none of us are saying that the curriculum does not need to be stringent. This is a very, very science-based field. But we're saying the things that are making grad school hard, to the point where we're just kind of surviving it instead of, you know, pushing through and thriving through it, is other things. It's other factors, like you were saying. So I don't know if you want to get into some of the factors. I know that I shared them on my episode, just even not knowing where to live and being far away from my placements because I didn't know that, you know, campus. And even once I knew, well, I don't have a credit score. I don't have parents that can do a down payment for me. So my only choice was living on campus and driving hours and hours every day. But I wanted to ask you, what do you think were the factors? Because I know it was in the curriculum. I know you're smart. I know you're so proficient at what you do. So what was it that made it so where you felt like you were just trying to survive?
Thank you. Yeah. I feel like if you were to ask my classmates, they would say that I was talented, that I was a good presenter, that I brought a lot to the table. But also, I was always late to class, and I would, you know, fall asleep during class. That's actually a thing that happened, which is so embarrassing to admit it. But I just want people to know, like, this community, the Bold SLP community, and people online, like, I see this as my community, because in grad school, I was so alone. There were other bilingual SLPs in the cohort that I was a part of, and I absolutely loved my cohort experience. My cohort members were just like such a part of my reason I kept going, and I kept, you know, I didn't give up because my cohort was really supportive, but I did feel the judgment from the staff, from the professors, from some classmates. I was struggling more than others, and that was part of the reason why I felt like there was something wrong with me. You're absolutely right. It was not the curriculum. It wasn't the coursework. It wasn't the structure of the program. At the end of the program, they ask us as students who have gone through it, what would your feedback be? And I still remember what my feedback was, because I was criticized for it. Not directly. Yeah. Actually, this is bringing it up because...
So they want feedback, but not honest feedback?
So the thing is, it's anonymous. So the staff never criticized me for it or brought it up, because our names aren't on the forms where we fill out the feedback.
Right.
But somehow, and this is where there is some toxicity in the grad programs. I'm not saying in every grad program, but when you talk to minority SLPs, you know there's toxicity in the programs that we cannot escape, that it just seeps in. And that's what happened to me. I was dealing with a lot of things that I never spoke about until it was the end. And then I spoke up about it in the feedback form. And I said, The fact that I'm a bilingual, that I was treated like a bilingual SLP and was given more bilingual clients than my classmates was a huge disadvantage for my performance in class. I was losing, I didn't say this, but I said, like, I know I was losing sleep over it. I spent more time preparing materials for my clients. I was expected to do it alone because my supervisors don't sign as well as I do. They don't speak Spanish. So I'm basically flying on my own, whereas my cohort members or my classmates are treated like students. I wasn't treated, I don't believe I was supported like I should have been.
Right.
And
I mean, none of us are, because there's not enough of us to go out there and teach.
Correct. So in that case, don't ask me to do that work because I'm a student and I'm vulnerable and I'm going to have to say yes because I want to pass the class and I want to do well and I want to get my grades and I need to survive. So in my situation, that's exactly it. And I think that's what the shared experience that we all have. We have to say, we have to be yes people because we need to survive.
We want to help our community.
And we want to help. And we are very well intentioned as well.
Mm-hmm.
But to what expense? That's the thing. It always cost me something. And as students, we're already paying monetarily and we're investing our time. And on top of that, minority SLPs are asked to sacrifice their mental health. They're asked to sacrifice their sleep. They're asked to sacrifice their peace of mind because a lot of the time I'm like, am I doing things right? So don't ask me, that's basically what I said. I said, you're asking all the students to do this heavy coursework on top of clinic work. And then you're putting more weight on my shoulders by giving me 4 out of 5 bilingual clients, whereas my peers have 2 to 3. And that's not fair. So that's what I put in my feedback form. Well, somehow the staff had spoken with some of my classmates about it. So then my classmates, this is all the gossip circle within the program I was a part of, which I'm saying like they're probably not the exception. This is probably the norm among the grad school.
I was going to say, yeah. And one iteration or another, there's, always people talking.
Yeah. So I was honestly ready. At that point, I was so done that I was ready to confront it because my classmates, we were all just talking. And they brought that up and they said, someone in our program said that clinic was too hard for them and that keeping up with coursework was too much. But if we change the coursework, then the program won't be rigorous enough and we won't be ready for the field. And I was just like, put the brakes on. I stopped the conversation. I said, okay, I'm about to say something, but I just need you guys to listen. I don't need you to respond. And they were like, I said, can I speak? And they were like, yes. I'm proud of myself now thinking back at it. It took a lot of guts. And I think
I should probably stay on brand and say that was really bold of you. So what did you say?
Little bold Marlene, that was like her one time. And actually it speaks to how safe I felt with my cohort members because they were a safe place for me at that time. And I said, hey, hold up, hold the phone. I need to tell you what I said. First of all, that was me because they were speculating it was another student that was also struggling. That was also a minority SLP.
Right.
And I knew her and I knew she was getting way better grades than me. And they were speculating that it was her. But because I was more well-liked, they didn't think it was me. Oh, so I just went off. I said, actually, that was me. And that's not what I said. It's sad. It's sad that my clinical supervisors think that's what I said because they didn't actually read what I said. They didn't understand what I meant because what I meant was, and then I went into the details that I basically just went
right. Because when we say we survived grad school, we don't mean that we couldn't hack it.
Correct.
We mean we had extra barriers that really were, an extra weight on us, like you were saying.
And they're preventable. Like my mental health has nothing to, my program can do nothing basically to help me with that except for prioritizing their students' mental health and checking in with them. But that was a preventable thing that I felt like I needed to talk to them about because I knew that would continue happening in cohorts after mine. That's the only reason I even brought it up. And then that basically confirmed that they didn't understand, nor did they care to receive my feedback.
Right, because they right away turned it into, well, that's a you problem.
And that's exactly the issue we have now, Ingrid, with equity. People that say equity is lowering standards.
They always say that. They water down the thing, or I'm like, no, that is not what we're talking about. Ugh.
It's
So
just
frustrating.
completely missing the point, and it's so frustrating. And part of the reason why I really lean on the online community, because not until I met you, Ingrid, in 2020, did I
Yay.
feel heard, did I feel understood. And I know that the other SLPs that know you feel the same way, like Desi has said, where we're just like on an island of despair. Like, no one understands me.
No, that was me. That was me saying that to Desi. No, we all feel that way. We all feel like we're the only ones. But I remember really connecting with you like on a heart level whenever you were talking about. So we're kind of skipping because you survived grad school. Now what? So
Yeah.
you got into your first job. Um, you know, made it through once again. And then I met you in 2020. So that was your year number 2.
I believe so. Yeah. I had just completed my CF, and then I completed a year of being a CCSLP, and then the pandemic hit.
Then the pandemic hit, and then we met. And I remember hearing you and just hearing myself in you because I had done the same thing after I was a CF, and then my first few years with my Cs. I just remember being behind on everything, on meetings, on paperwork, on Medicaid billing, feeling completely overwhelmed and thinking it was all my fault. And for me, everything changed whenever I had my daughter and I realized how much work I was doing outside of my work hours.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that I've said it before on the podcast, like it wasn't until I had to dedicate my time to her and quantify my time and also like value my time for her because I had this other little human who was depending on me, then I realized like how much my time was worth and that there was nothing that I was doing wrong. Like I was just set up to fail as the only bilingual SLP in the whole entire district. And so whenever I heard your voice and saw your messages, it was so easy for me to say like, Marlene, this is not your fault. Like, look at your caseload. No, do not spend your spring break doing this. Talk to them. Advocate for yourself. Like, this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
I just like saw myself 5 years ago in
Yeah.
you, and I realized I'm like, oh my gosh, like she literally thinks that she's behind because she's not organized.
Yeah. Not good
And I'm
enough.
like, oof, no. But yeah, how was that year for you? How did 2020 kind of like bring that all to a head for you?
Right. So around the time that we met was when I was finally ready to understand what, like, for those words to sink in. It's
Right.
not your fault. It's not
Yeah.
you. Like that never computed until I finally hit a wall in 2020, realizing and having literally my therapist, who's a psychologist, tell me, Marlene, you have been functioning at a capacity that's greater than others. You know that objectively, because I did talk to my supervisor. Finally, I had the guts. Crying, but I spoke with my supervisor about the fact that I was drowning, because to me, that was the most shameful thing that I could have ever done, was to admit that I had failed, even though I hadn't really failed.
No.
It felt like I had. And my therapist, she was just like, Marlene, you did it. Like, I'm so proud of you. And can you see now that you have been functioning at a greater capacity than others and that you didn't fail, that you were literally doing the best you could given the circumstances?
Yep.
That was like a foreign language to me, but it finally sunk in 2020 when I was just buried in paperwork in my bedroom on my laptop, buying green screen materials just so that I could see my students for therapy.
Right.
Crying in between sessions, trying to remember to feed myself, trying to live and survive through a pandemic.
Yeah.
And showing up for my students. That's what it took for me to realize I'm not a bad person. I'm doing the best I can. And also, looking back, this was always a problem. But now, given these impossible circumstances, I can finally see that I'm not the problem.
Right.
And that's what pushed me finally to accept what you were telling me. It took me, and I guess I'm just very determined. Like, that's how I've survived. That's the thing, is I don't think that we realize, like, when people say it's supposed to be hard, you're supposed to work hard.
Not like this.
Nice for a handout.
Mm-hmm.
I take that so to heart more than that is healthy for me. I overwork
Right.
myself by default. That's what people don't understand. And I think that we're cut from the same cloth, where it's so sad now talking about that you didn't actually value your own time until it had value to your daughter, until
Yeah.
it meant that it was time you could have given to your daughter, which is like, that's the moment to get it. And like, hallelujah that you finally got it at that moment. But at the same time, like, even people who don't have children, like,
They deserve to have their time off.
yes, your time matters, and you deserve to give yourself the time that you need for you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that is something that would have never computed. I don't know when it would have, until I hit that rock bottom moment and being like, okay, I'm not taking care of myself. I'm completely depressed. The only thing I have to look forward to is like my dog and my husband. Besides, the world, it felt like it was falling apart, right?
Yeah. That's when I went to Instagram too, 2020.
Yeah. So that was just like a huge balm to my aching soul to find other bilingual SLPs on Instagram and being like, I'm finally ready for community. Like, I'm finally reaching out and like met you on Instagram, and you being like a big sis and speaking words of wisdom and encouragement, and not just anybody, but like someone who understands and someone who had been through something very similar. And
Right.
you really understood like how cultural it is to be like,
I
I
need
deserve
help.
it for myself.
Yeah. Or I'm demanding more
Yeah.
because we're supposed to be happy to just have made it.
Right. Which is a very noble thing. And I believe that like our parents and our ancestors have passed down a very noble thing. And like, I wouldn't be where I am if it weren't for their sacrifices.
Right.
But at some point, I can't be as effective. I can't make a difference as well if I'm not caring for myself first. And for a long time, I think that trauma and burnout holds us back from being our best clinicians, our best selves, really.
Right.
So
Right.
it's very counterproductive not to prioritize mental health and wellness first, and then giving from the overflow instead of giving from the deficit, instead of me just being like, I'm going to give everything I have until I'm at zero, and then I'll feel like I did a good job. That's not healthy.
And that's where we lose SLPs.
Oh, exactly.
Right? We lose them either from the schools a lot of the time. And I guess we should have kind of clarified that both of us connected on that end, that we are both in the schools. And then we both have experience with preschoolers and also have experience being on several different campuses because we're the only ones who can do certain things.
Yep.
So we connected on all those extra things that are beyond the stringent curriculum of SLPs. I would like to see one of those SLPs making those nasty comments come do our job one day.
Exactly.
Like, let's be real.
Thank you.
They wouldn't even know where to start. Yeah, I know, because we've had to figure things out with so little.
Correct.
From the beginning. So how do we find that happy medium so no one has to just survive through grad school? Like, I know it's meant to be a very, very top tier career. What we do is very important.
Yes.
But the things that we're talking about that made it hard are things that we've been carrying since we were kids, I think, a lot of us. So just generational and institutional and pervasive.
And as we transition into talking about after grad school,
yes.
So you survived grad school. Now what?
Now what?
So inevitably, what ends up happening for someone like me, like if others can relate, or maybe you can compare it to you, Ingrid, what ends up happening for people like me is that we carry the same expectations and the same habits into the CF year. Because when you're a clinical fellow, again, you feel like you're indebted to the person who's mentoring you. You're like, this is my chance to make it. Like, I'm not a real SLP until I get my C's. And you kind of have to settle, with whatever opportunity there is. I'm not saying you have to. I'm saying that for someone like me, you don't believe that you really deserve to like negotiate or get what you really want. You should just go for whatever you're given and be grateful for that. So
Yep, that was me.
and financially too, I could not afford to stay in Washington, D.C. I had to move back home to Las Vegas, which was a huge expense to move back across the country again. But the company I signed on for gave me like a moving budget, like a moving bonus, which was not enough, but it gave me the ability to move back home without going into more severe debt. So like I've always struggled with a lot of debt. My family could never help me, pay for school. They helped me in other ways, like praying for me and buying me a laptop. God bless them.
Right.
Their heart, they did everything that they could. But yeah, financially, I was in a terrible situation. So I had to move back home. And that was the right decision for me. I lived at home, for the next 3 years until I got married. And I did my CF back in Las Vegas in the school district where I had worked previously as a bachelor's level SLP. And I actually had an amazing mentor. So that for me was like the bonus. She was not bilingual, but she was a specialized SLP. So she had a specialty. And so I really admire her to this day because she did an amazing job at paving a way for herself and having a manageable caseload and time for consultations and time for mentoring new CFs. So I really still, stay in touch with her and admire her for that. Because of her, my CF experience was great. She did affirm, the areas where I was still struggling. But if I think looking back at it, because I was so used to overperforming in grad school, my CF was relatively easy compared to grad school.
Yeah.
But then the problem is, and I know there are other, school-based SLPs or maybe, others can relate, when you're good and you're keeping up, sometimes the department that you're working for or the district that you're working for will just go ahead and throw more at you because you can do it and you do the job well.
Mm-hmm.
So that inevitably happened to me. And I'm saying inevitably because of the state of my mental health at that time. I didn't know that I could and should negotiate and say no. This is new for me. This is like very recent. After 1.5 years of psychotherapy, I can now start to think of saying the word no. But back then, I was just like, yes, I can do it. Therefore, I should and I will. And I'm going to do it. Like, I'm going to blow their expectations, out of the water. So I've always just been an achiever. And so I took that attitude into my next 3 years of working, not realizing that there are other, let's say I'm trilingual. My caseload is, as it was, more than 60% bilingual. And I was carrying a higher caseload than normal. So like a high caseload in my district for a monolingual SLP is 55 or above. That's considered a high caseload.
Yeah,
and
that is pretty high.
It's pretty high, right? So it's like manageable, but you're working really hard. Like you're working every minute that you're at work minus your lunch.
Right.
And maybe sometimes on the weekend for a monolingual SLP. Now throw into it a trilingual caseload where more than 60% of my caseload is bilingual / trilingual, and I'm at 65.
Oh my gosh. And then you have to do all the screenings, all the evals.
I do all my own evals. I don't have to consult with anybody because I'm a 3-in-1 deal.
Right.
But why am I also functioning as a high caseload at the same time?
Yeah.
So something is not computing here. And I have to take responsibility for being, contributing to the problem because of my trauma and because of my, achievement and my need to be perfect and my need to please. I said yes. I never set a boundary and I didn't know how to ask for help. Now in 2020, I started to get better through therapy. My therapist really coached me on how to communicate to my supervisor about my caseload and my workload. And Ingrid, I really have to thank you for that because that's around the time that you started the Bilingual SLPs Clubhouse.
Yes, all our Clubhouse chats.
Our Clubhouse chats were very instrumental. K-Night Therapy, Callie, I think her name is Callie.
Callie, yeah.
She was very instrumental as also a bilingual school-based SLP talking about this. Like, how do we objectively communicate our workload to our supervisors? And thankfully, I did actually leave that job and we will get to that. But my supervisor was incredibly understanding. She always said, Marlene, thank you for letting me know. Like, now I know how I can help you.
Right.
That's not the case for everyone. Like the supervisor I had previous to this supervisor was not like that at all. She would have been like, I don't understand. Why can't you do it?
Oh my gosh.
Being like, we want to keep you, we appreciate you, and I'll figure out how we can help, you know?
Yep.
So it's been a learning experience for me, but I did ultimately have to make the decision to leave the position because the system is,
I was going to say, you kind of just dropped that on us. So what
yeah.
is next?
Yeah, so because the system is not built for people like us, and for me, being someone who is so like in recovery with my mental health, I have decided to quit my job and say goodbye to all the students and the people that I love. And I am a school-based SLP in my heart, but I have left my full-time job and I'm just going to work my own contracts. Like through one of my CF mentors, she encouraged me to not work for an agency anymore. Like she said, you need to know your worth. Don't settle for less. You're not stuck. Because I really went to her when I was burning out even more than I thought was possible.
Right.
And she just said, Marlene, you're not stuck. Look, let's talk about it. Let's talk about opening your practice. Let's talk about you working for my company. Like, you're not stuck. We need people like you, and this is something who's been in the field for over 20 years. And I really trust like her encouragement and her advice. And she's also a bilingual provider. And so are you. And so Ingrid being like, this is how we lose SLPs. Like, that's a reality.
It is.
For us. And it is a reality for me. And I think that I had to make the decision to leave for my mental health. And the people who I worked with, thankfully, have been very supportive. And they're like, I'm proud of you for standing up for, for what you need right now. And so right now I'm just going to work private contracts in Las Vegas for people that need services or people who need trilingual services and work privately that way.
That's awesome. I know I have so many thoughts in my brain. I'm like trying to organize them because I am so proud of you, especially because I know that you're starting your own thing. And that's like so inspiring to me. And it's something that I wish I had ready right now to go, but I'm starting just on the side. But that's another thing. Like, as much as I've advocated for myself, like I've never had the bandwidth at the end of the day or at the end of the year. I just don't want to think about speech therapy.
Yeah.
And
right.
Because I just put so much into it. But I was just thinking about what you said, that, you are still a school-based SLP at heart.
Mm-hmm.
I know that I talked about this already in a post in a different episode, but it resonates so much with me that we are not our jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And our skills that we brought to grad school with us, and then we used them to grow more skills, build new ones. We brought them with us out of grad school, into our CF year, into our Cs. We keep growing and growing and growing our skills, and they are ours to keep wherever we go.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we take them everywhere with us, even if it's outside of the schools, or even some people outside of our field who are just like done with it. Like Dr. Humbert comes to mind.
Mm-hmm.
Her skills are hers to keep, and so are yours. So rock on, Marlene.
Thank you, Ingrid. I do plan to stay in the field, just in a different capacity. And unfortunately, I have to work outside of my specialty for some time just to like recover. But
Yes.
I'm definitely planning to stay connected and keep growing and keep learning. Like you said, that's what is amazing about our field, is we're never really in a box. We just put ourselves into a box, but really there's just like infinite more that we can learn and do. And that's why I really love it at the end of the day.
Yay. Thank you so much, Marlene.
Thank you, Ingrid. And congratulations again on this whole podcast journey and your private practice. I'm just so grateful for you, and I'm so grateful for the community here. And thank you for being a part of my story.
Thank you for listening and supporting the Bold SLP Collective. You can find a closed caption version of this podcast on our YouTube channel. We will also have show notes on our website. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd really appreciate it if you do all the podcast things. Follow, subscribe, download, and review. And don't forget, we love hearing from you, so connect with us on Instagram at the Bold SLP Collective. Stay bold and humble. See you next time.